Greetings, I'm Sarah Nahar, and I'm from the middle of the Great Lakes watershed in Elkhart, Indiana, which is traditional Potawatomi land. I'm the descendant of both willing and unwilling settlers who now live there, that being generations of fugitive Mennonites on one side and formerly enslaved Africans on the other. But I'm speaking to you now from the eastern side of the Great Lakes watershed in so-called Syracuse, which is Onondaga land, and it's been a humbling blessing to be in proximity to the Haudenosaunee host of this conference and to study these themes in this space. What I'm going to share with you this evening comes out of my 2 decades of spiritual activism, as well as a recent doctoral independent study on people of color perspectives on the doctrine of discovery. That is, folks who are not Native, but are also not white. How do we fit in this conversation? The first violence perpetuated against Black people due to the doctrine of discovery was not enslavement. Rather, it was invasion, destruction, and extraction of our indigenous resources and space, and furthermore, the elimination of our indigeneity through the transatlantic trade. An imposition of foreign rule and leadership similar to here, and how hard it's been to recover, though not impossible, the efforts at self-determination on the continent of Africa continue to be under threat from colonial and neo-colonial and neoliberal global policy. And so one connection that Black folks have as we think about how we repair our relationship with this land as well as with Indigenous people is to recognize that we have some experiences in common through colonization and the rupture of our lifeways in places that we were Indigenous. And though there has been a population of Afro-Native people here, and oral history notes that there's significant interaction between continental Africans and Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island and Abya-Shala before Columbus. Even given some of these historic connections, overall, our recent activism for positive social change has been kind of separate. And that's partially because of how white supremacy impacts our communities differently. As Kelly Hayes writes, white supremacy seeks to erase Indigenous people while exploit Black folks. And it wants to see Indigenous people disappear while Black people stay around and accept their subordinate status. And so that's a different impact. And so talking across those experiences can sometimes be difficult. And Lincoln is also a point of tension. Mark Charles writes more about the impact of Abraham Lincoln on Black and Native communities. And even given some of these historical divides, this is a moment of coming together. The direct violence against George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many US American Black people has resulted in lots of revolt and toppling statues, including the Columbus statue. People are recognizing that the narrative power for police brutality comes from the doctrine of discovery, which Columbus epitomizes. In our work in Syracuse together to remove the Columbus statue, work that has been done by Indigenous people here for a long time, there's been a new groundswell of activity to remove that statue as a result of Black Lives Matter work. And we recognize that Columbus was the first cop. Columbus was an agent of the state with lethal force to command obedience. That's how the police function. Symbols have power, and his presence here, standing atop derogatory images of the Haudenosaunee, his westward gaze, the statue is situated right between the cathedral and the courthouse. This reminds us of that historic violence and commits ongoing symbolic violence. So this is a moment, we say, to declare that Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty are linked. Make your doctrine of discovery groups welcoming by recognizing that anti-racism work is connected with dismantling the doctrine of discovery. Help heal these historic divides. And though achieving civil and political rights is not always exactly the same as decolonial work, they are connected and there are generative tensions between them. Welcome this tension into your settler ally groups and in your work, and notice when anti-Blackness is popping up, and name that. Since whiteness has its roots in European Christian hegemony, the call to end white supremacy is also a call to dismantle the doctrine of discovery. Without the perspectives of settlers of color, your group will not be as effective and there won't be as much perspective. So what can we do to make our groups more welcoming? A word on language. People of color who are not Native and not white are not settlers in the European sense. So maybe settler of color works. I use unwilling settlers before. Immigrants doesn't fit a description of most Black folks, and it's an open question what to call ourselves. Arrivance has been offered for non-Native people of color and is sometimes used in Canada. But we're just developing a vocabulary to speak to the unique experience of being intensely oppressed in a land that is not your home, but it is where you live. And you have a responsibility to the indigenous peoples in whose space you occupy. It's a tough question. Some people of color are recognizing that we will be controlled by these systems of violence and scarcity and inaccessibility until we can grow our own food. Collectives like Northeast Farmers of Color, NEFOC, a Black and brown group working to free the land and feed our people, asks, what does it mean to go for food sovereignty on stolen land? What do our accountabilities to the traditional stewards of the elements here look like? And many Latinx folks are working on the reclamation of Indigenous identity, pushed into identifying with Latino culture and speaking Spanish due to the political climate of the US. There has been loss in having to do that because that has meant an ongoing erasure of their Indigenous identity as well as the African identities present in many of their bodies and experiences. And so many creative regeneration initiatives, language, arts, spirituality, calendaring, sexuality, education are all underway in many parts of the Latino community to think about how they relate to decolonization. And Buddhist Peace Fellowship, a group that works on blocking harm, building alternatives, and being in alignment with our deepest values, ask what does it mean to practice a non-Western spiritual tradition that is not native to this land here in the US? What are the ways that Asian peoples and their labor have been conscripted by the machinery of Doctrine and Discovery to further the American project? And simultaneously, Asian Americans have been direct victims of its reach. Some Jewish diaspora groups are thinking together about the tenuousness of the position of Ashkenazi people and some others being offered white privilege, but not white belonging, as Mickey Cashin would call it, and their positions as non-Christian settlers. They're working at feeling into the connections between the 1492 expulsion from Andalusia, Spain, and the colonization of the Americas. Andalusia was a space of interreligious coexistence. In the same year that Granada fell, Columbus set sail. Palestinian and other Arab folks are recognizing themselves as named as Saracens, the Doctrine of Discovery, descendants of Salah ad-Din's army. And how even before heading to West Africa, the Doctrine of Discovery authorized violence against Jews, Muslims, and indigenous Palestinian Christians through the Crusades. They're beginning to study again Christianity as an indigenous wisdom tradition of the Eastern Mediterranean watershed, reclaiming Christianity as the grassroots movement to challenge empire before the intensity of the trauma of mass persecution and Templar destruction and the co-optation by Constantine happened. And out of that, they're doing work to begin to expose the anti-Semitism and Islamophobic political theology of Christian Zionism as a modern project of the Doctrine of Discovery. So those are some glimpses into other conversations and readings I've been a part of. Lots to think about there. The longer and slower version of this talk is on YouTube. And I just want to conclude with some language shifts that will make space for these generative conversations among white settlers and those who are people of color who are living on colonized land, allowing our groups to be more welcoming. I would invite us to integrate the language of enslaved Africans rather than slaves, because we were and are so much more than our economic position relative to empire. And also take care when you may find yourself saying the phrase, we as settlers, or we've messed it all up when we arrived, or we humans, when you're actually referring to a more specific group of people and power structures. Practice articulating the connections between Black Lives Matter, the liberation of Palestine and Israel, immigration justice, and dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery. Or when you hear anti-Chinese rhetoric or Orientalist policy or the refusal of refugees, begin to name how this is the Doctrine of Discovery in action. And when you address climate catastrophe that is so intensely impacting the Pacific Islands, the poles, coastal South Asia, perhaps your community as well, when you resist the endless US-led wars on Afghanistan, Iraq, and threats to Iran, articulate how these efforts are part of dismantling the Doctrine of Discovery in this day and age, and here and now. See you in the struggle.